found myself once again drawn to Evelyn's manuscript, the leather-bound tome that had become both my obsession and my torment. The candle flickered low, casting long shadows that danced and writhed across the walls of the library where I sat alone, my fingers tracing the jagged edges of the pages as though trying to glean hidden meaning through touch alone. There was something wrong with these pages, not just in their incomplete, fragmented state, but in the way they seemed to shift under my gaze. I could swear the words rearranged themselves, the sentences bending and twisting into new forms overnight. Perhaps it was the storm playing tricks on my eyes, or the exhaustion gnawing at my mind, but the feeling was unmistakable. The manuscript was alive, or at least responding to the events around us. It began with small details, a character's mannerism, a setting described with uncanny precision that mirrored the retreat's atmosphere. Then came the more disturbing echoes, a cryptic passage describing a violent confrontation, a death shrouded in mystery. I dismissed the first inkling as coincidence, but when the body was found, it was impossible to ignore. The first murder, brutal and senseless, had unfolded in the very manner Evelyn had hinted at in her unfinished work. That night, the estate was plunged into chaos. Jonas Reed moved swiftly, his background in law enforcement evident as he cordoned off the scene and began questioning the guests. Yet beneath his calm exterior, I could sense the strain of uncertainty. None of us were safe, and suspicion had begun to fester like a poison in the room. Felix Morland was the first to draw my wary attention. The poet's usual reclusive demeanor cracked under the weight of accusation. His sharp eyes darted suspiciously, and his words were curt, defensive. Rumors whispered of a complicated past with Evelyn, jealousy, rivalry, perhaps something darker. Sophie Lane, ever the composed editor, seemed almost too measured, her cool gaze assessing everyone with surgical precision. I could not tell if she was ally or adversary. Dinner that evening was a brittle affair. Conversations stumbled over polite pleasantries, but beneath the surface, currents of fear and mistrust surged. I watched carefully, noting every glance, every hesitation. The storm outside roared like a beast clawing at the walls, and inside, the tension was just as palpable. Back in my room, I pored over the manuscript again, cross-referencing it obsessively with the events that had unfolded. The parallels were too precise to dismiss. Each new chapter seemed to bleed into reality, as if Evelyn's words were a script for a nightmare none of us had yet fully awakened to. My hands trembled as I scribbled notes and questions, the line between creator and victim blurring with every passing hour. Clara Finch tried to reach me, her voice a gentle tether to sanity, but I found myself recoiling. I could no longer trust even her steady presence. Paranoia had taken root, feeding on every uncertain memory and fractured thought. The storm outside was nothing compared to the tempest raging within my mind. Jonas called a meeting in the drawing room, his tone firm but weary. He urged calm, demanded cooperation, but the fractures among us were deepening. Each glance exchanged was a calculated move in a silent game of accusation and defense. The manuscript loomed like a specter over us all, a haunting reminder that the past and present were entwined in a deadly dance. As I sat there, surrounded by faces etched with fear and suspicion, I realized the truth was slipping further away. The manuscript was no longer just Evelyn's unfinished story, was a map of our descent, a mirror reflecting the darkness stalking the island. And somewhere in that darkness, the predator waited, waiting for the next page to turn. The night stretched on, heavy with unspoken dread. And as the rain hammered the windows, I knew with chilling certainty that the echoes in the pages were far from over. The storm outside battered the windows with renewed vigor, rain pelting the glass in relentless sheets, threading the oppressive silence with the occasional groan of the old estate. Shadows flickered in the candlelight, casting long, twisting shapes that seemed to mock the chaos inside my mind. I tried desperately to make sense of the fragmented narrative, the shifting timelines, the contradictory clues, but the harder I pressed, the more elusive the truth became. Memory had become a traitor. Each recollection, like a shattered mirror, reflected fragments that refused to fit neatly together. I recalled Clara's soft voice in the dim-lit common room just hours ago, her eyes wide with a mixture of concern and uncertainty. "Are you sure that's how it happened?" she had asked gently, her fingers brushing a stray lock of hair from my forehead. I wanted to assure her, to fix my story in place, but the words tangled in my throat. I wasn't sure. Was I remembering the late-night confrontation with Felix Morland as it truly happened, or was it a distorted echo feeding my growing dread? Felix had cornered me in the hallway, his gaunt face a harsh silhouette beneath the flickering sconces. His voice was low, edged with menace. "You don't know the half of it," he whispered, eyes cold and unreadable. The accusation hung in the air, thick and suffocating. I recoiled, heart pounding not just from fear, but from the gnawing suspicion that everyone here harbored secrets deeper and darker than I could fathom. Who was the mask, and who the truth? Jonas Reed's pragmatic approach to the chaos offered some grounding, but even his firm demeanor couldn't pierce the fog that clouded my thoughts. In the study, under the harsh glare of a single lamp, Jonas's voice was steady but insistent. "You need to piece this together. The others are counting on you to see through the fog." But how could I? Each attempt to clarify the sequence of events only twisted the threads tighter, the manuscript's pages seeming to shift beneath my gaze, as if alive and mocking my desperation. Clara's warmth was a fragile tether in the tempest, but even she wavered, shadows crossing her usually luminous expression. Our conversations became hesitant dances around truths too painful or confusing to confront outright. I found myself scribbling frantic notes, trying to anchor my slipping mind to something solid, but the notes only served to remind me of how unreliable I had become. False identities emerged like phantoms in the mist. Whispers and half-glances suggested that no one was quite who they claimed to be, and every revelation only deepened the labyrinth of suspicion. In this island prison, under the storm's relentless assault, trust crumbled like the brittle pages of Evelyn's unfinished manuscript. As night bled into dawn, I realized the retreat had become a stage for shadows of memory, of lies, of fractured selves. And I was trapped in the center, unsure if I was investigator or accused, victim or perpetrator. The manuscript was no longer just a relic of Evelyn's genius. It was a living puzzle, a cruel mirror reflecting the fractured reality I inhabited. I closed my eyes against the mounting chaos, but sleep was a stranger, and the storm outside whispered promises I was too afraid to hear. The line between what was real and what was imagined blurred with every passing moment. And the question that haunted me most was no longer who was responsible, but whether I could trust the very mind that sought the truth. A sharp rap at the door jolted me from my spiraling thoughts. Jonas's voice was clipped. "We need to talk." Now I rose, heart hammering, and stepped into the unknown once more. The manuscript's shifting text, a dark echo at the edge of my mind. The storm was far from over, inside or out. The wind howled like a chorus of ghosts, rattling windows and shaking the very foundations beneath our feet. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with tension, each shadow seeming to harbor secrets darker than the night itself. I found myself lingering in the dimly lit hallway adjacent to the main salon. drawn inexplicably to the figure of Margot Vale. She stood motionless, her silhouette framed by the flickering candlelight that struggled against the encroaching darkness. Her sharp features were set in an inscrutable expression, eyes cold and calculating, as if weighing some invisible plan. There was something about her presence, and almost predatory stillness, that pricked at the edges of my unease. "You're staring again." Clara's voice startled me, soft and tentative. She stepped beside me, her youthful face etched with concern. "She's unsettling, isn't she?" I nodded, though words failed me. Margot's charm was undeniable, but beneath it lay a venom I couldn't place. Every glance she cast seemed loaded with layers of meaning, every smile a possible mask. I swallowed hard, feeling the familiar tightening coil of paranoia begin to wind within me. Jonas Reed's footsteps echoed down the corridor, firm and purposeful. His broad frame filled the doorway, his face set in that grim, no-nonsense mask he wore like armor. "You need to stop watching her like a hawk," he said, voice low but edged with authority. "If you let suspicion consume you, you'll lose your grip on reality." I bristled, the words feeling less like advice and more like a reprimand. "And what if she's the one we should be watching?" I challenged, voice barely above a whisper. Jonas's eyes narrowed. "We need facts, not fears." The clash between his pragmatic approach and my fragmented, increasingly chaotic observations left a bitter taste. I wanted to believe his steadiness, but the storm inside me raged louder than reason. Later, in the narrow dining room, Clara reached across the scarred wooden table, her hands warm against mine. "You're not alone," she whispered. "We'll figure this out together." Her empathy was a fragile lifeline, a flicker of hope in the encroaching darkness. But even as I clung to it, the shadows seemed to deepen around us. Suddenly, the lights flickered violently and then died, plunging the estate into pitch black. The howling wind surged through the cracks and crevices, carrying with it whispered fears and the unmistakable scent of damp stone and old wood. In that suffocating darkness, I felt Etan's unseen presence, watching, waiting. The predator was close, and the retreat was no longer a sanctuary but a cage. My breath quickened, every sense straining against the black veil. Somewhere in the silence, a secret stirred, threatening to unravel us all. As the storm outside reached its crescendo, so too did the storm within me. I was caught between the brittle order Jonas tried to impose and the chaotic spiral of my own mind. And at the center of it all, Margot Vale's cold, calculating gaze remained fixed, an enigma wrapped in shadows. The night was far from over, and the unseen threat was only beginning to reveal its claws. Outside, the storm howled relentlessly, the wind thrashing the tall windows and sending a chorus of rattles through the ancient frames. Within this uneasy refuge, I sat alone, the flickering candlelight barely illuminating the fragile pages spread before me. They trembled under my fingers, as if alive, their words shifting like shadows cast by the storm. I had been drawn to the manuscript since Evelyn's death, a spectral presence hovering over the estate like a ghost refusing to rest. Yet what I found defied logic. Passages I could have sworn I read yesterday had altered, new lines emerging where only blank space had been. The narrative twisted and turned, revealing secrets buried deep beneath Evelyn's elegant prose, secrets that whispered of a darker, more tangled history. And at the heart of it, Margot Vale. It was during one of these long hours in the library that I stumbled upon the connection, a series of cryptic references that linked Evelyn and Margot not only professionally but personally. The manuscript hinted at a friendship soured by betrayal, a mentorship turned sour beneath the weight of jealousy and unspoken grievances. My hands shook as I read the fragments describing a sunlit garden, laughter that had once been genuine, now stained with envy. The lines were hauntingly beautiful, yet laced with venom. The revelation unsettled me, fracturing the fragile alliances that had begun to form among the guests. Later, in the main hall, tensions erupted. Voices rose, accusatory glances were exchanged, and the veneer of civility cracked wide open. Clara's warm eyes, usually so full of hope, flickered with doubt as she confronted Jonas, who stood firm, trying to impose order amid the chaos. I watched from the sidelines, feeling the weight of suspicion press down on me like the storm outside pressing against the island's walls. Each revelation seemed to deepen the gulf between us, and I found myself retreating further into isolation. In my room, the manuscript was both a lifeline and a noose, its pages whispering truths and lies in equal measure. My memories fractured, overlapping with the manuscript's shifting narrative until I could no longer distinguish where Evelyn's story ended and my own paranoia began. The thunder outside echoed the tempest within, a relentless reminder that I was losing control. I questioned my own sanity, wondering if the manuscript's changes were a cruel trick of my mind or a deliberate message left by Evelyn or even Margot. Was the truth hidden in these mutable pages, or was I chasing shadows conjured by my own fear? The line between creator and victim blurred, and I found myself trapped in a web of deceit spun by those who had come here seeking inspiration, only to become characters in a deadly story far beyond our control. As the storm raged on, so did the secrets, and I was left clutching the manuscript, desperate for answers yet terrified of what I might find next. The night stretched on, each hour folding into the next like a page turning itself. I could hear voices beyond my door, hushed, frantic, as the guests grappled with the new revelations. The manuscript had become a prism, fracturing our perceptions of Evelyn and Margot, casting long shadows over every interaction. Clara found me eventually, her presence a fragile tether to reality. "You have to rest," she urged softly, but even her warmth couldn't penetrate the fog clouding my mind. I shook my head, unable to tear my eyes from the shifting text. "It's changing again," I whispered, voice cracked with exhaustion and fear. She frowned, concern etching lines on her youthful face. "Maybe it's trying to tell us something, or maybe it's just your mind playing tricks." I wanted to believe her, but the uncertainty gnawed at me. That night, sleep was a stranger, and when dawn finally broke, it found me still tangled in the manuscript's mysteries, a prisoner of secrets, unveiled but not yet understood. The island was no longer just a retreat. It was a crucible, burning away the facades we all wore. And as Evelyn's story bled into our own, I realized that the past we thought was buried was very much alive and waiting to claim us all. The question lingered, sharp and unyielding. In a place where fiction and reality twisted together like the storm outside, could any of us truly know the truth? Or were we all just characters in Evelyn's last, most terrifying tale? I closed the manuscript reluctantly, the candle guttering as a cold draft slipped through the cracked window. The storm showed no sign of relenting, and neither did the secrets it carried. I hesitated at the door, the weight of the storm pressing against the window panes like a silent threat. The manuscript lay open on the polished desk, but my eyes were drawn to a small, folded envelope tucked beneath a heavy leather-bound tome. It was yellowed with age, edges frayed, and sealed with a cracked wax imprint that bore no clear mark. My fingers trembled as I broke the seal, unfolding the brittle paper to reveal cramped, hurried handwriting. At first, the words were cryptic, but as I read, A chilling narrative emerged, a long-buried betrayal between Evelyn Hart and Margot Vale. The letter spoke of broken trust, whispered accusations, and a fracture that had splintered their once close bond. It hinted at stolen ideas, sabotaged careers, and a friendship turned venomous. The revelation struck me like a thunderclap, shaking the fragile ground beneath the retreat. I sank into the worn leather chair, the letter trembling in my grasp. Could this be the root of the violence unraveling around us? The storm outside rattled the windows in violent gusts, mirroring the tempest within my mind. Paranoia seeped into every thought, infecting my perceptions. Faces once familiar now seemed masks concealing darker intentions. I found myself scanning the room as if expecting shadows to leap from the corners. Later, in the dimly lit library, Margot Vale's presence was as imposing as ever. The fire sputtered, casting flickering shadows that danced across her sharp features. Her cold gaze met mine, unblinking, calculating. "You found the letter," she said softly, a statement rather than a question. I swallowed my fear, trying to steady my voice. "What happened between you and Evelyn?" A bitter smile curved her lips. "What happened is irrelevant. It's the consequences that matter." Her words hung like a guillotine blade, threatening to sever the fragile threads holding this place together. The confrontation was a collision of wills, her poised menace against my desperate need for truth. But beneath the hostility, a deeper game was unfolding, one I was only beginning to comprehend. Back in my room, the storm outside was relentless. The rhythmic drumming of rain against the panes was a cruel lullaby as I paced beneath the harsh pool of light from my desk lamp. Memories flickered in and out, fragments of conversations, half-remembered glances, and the manuscript's cryptic passages swirling into a maddening kaleidoscope. My grip on reality wavered, the boundary between fact and fiction blurring until I wasn't sure if I was the hunter or the hunted. In one rare moment of respite, Clara Finch found me in the conservatory, her presence a soft contrast to the encroaching darkness. Her eyes held a cautious warmth as she reached out. "We have to hold on to something real," she whispered, her voice steady despite the tension. Together, her words offered a fragile thread of hope in the suffocating fog of suspicion. But even as I grasped it, the shadows of betrayal stretched long and cold, threatening to engulf us all. The letters, revelations, had torn open old wounds, fracturing the retreat's fragile peace and plunging us deeper into a labyrinth of mistrust. Every glance, every whispered word now carried the weight of suspicion. The murders were no longer random acts of violence, they were the echoes of a history soaked in resentment and revenge. And I was caught in the middle, a fragile soul unraveling under the crushing weight of secrets not my own. The line between ally and enemy was dissolving, replaced by a swirling mistrust that threatened to consume us all. As the storm outside reached its crescendo, so too did the storm within me, an inescapable tempest of doubt, fear, and a desperate hunger for truth. The shadows of betrayal were lengthening, and with them, the darkness closing in. I knew, with a certainty that chilled my very bones, that nothing would ever be the same again. The unanswered question hovered like a specter. Who could I trust when the past itself was weaponized against us? And more dangerously still was I already too lost in the shadows to find my way back. The manuscript lay waiting, its pages whispering secrets that might save us or doom us all. The next move was mine, and the game was far from over.